Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Steve, once again. And thank you very much for your kind cooperation.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear you again.
That is so nice of you. Let me my face as well. Can you see me now?
Yes, yes, I can see you now. So, how are you?
That is good. Yes, I'm good. Pretty good.
Not,
so,
unfortunately, have heard that Pakistan has been suffering another big event of floods like 2010.
Yes, but this time the impact of these floods are much devastating as compared to 2010. You
More
can
devastating?
see almost, yeah, more than 2010. Yes.
Ooh.
There are a lot of miseries in Balochistan and Sindh province. Almost all the Sindh districts are underwater, and they are underwater like 2 feet to 12 feet water everywhere.
Ooh.
In Sindh.
That's not good. So I hope the international community is helping.
Almost 70% of the districts of yes, international community is also helping. Locals, Pakistani community, they are also everyone is trying to help out, but the problem is very big. प्लीज बाकी जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं आप प्लीज अपने आप को म्यूट कर लीजिए थैंक यू Okay, I think we have फटाफट खालिद साहब okay, as we have almost greater works some other issue.
Yep.
So we can just wait for
So I'm seeing here it's pretty warm at your place at 34 degrees right now, apparently.
Yes, it is not only yeah, it is not only hot, but it is humid as well. Very humid. More than usual. Yeah.
That makes it very hard to bear the heat. Makes it more.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, it feels like 39. Yeah.
Yes. Let me class listening to your webinar. Let me have the opportunity to introduce our today's speaker, Professor Dr. Stephen Schilizzi. He obtained his PhD in economics from France, agriculture, resource, and energy, but was also laureate of École Normale Supérieure in Paris, having read the humanities, the classics, and languages. He previously obtained his bachelor's degree in math and physics, a master's in sociology, and a bachelor's in the international law. So he has a versatile background of learning. When working for the National Institute of Agricultural Sciences in Montpellier, France, he gained experience in Southeast Asia, Central Africa, and Central America. After joining the UWA, he built on his experience in Vietnam by heading several research projects and leading a joint course between UWA and Vietnamese universities. Stephen is a professor of environmental and agricultural economics at UWA School of Agriculture and Environment. He's worked both in Australia and in Europe currently focuses on how public agencies can leverage social norms together with economic incentives to get private landholders to supply environmental services like biodiversity protection or reduced air or water pollution. He also works on how equity concerns can be rigorously incorporated into environmental policies in trade-offs with other policy objectives, as well as in farm economics, risk management, energy economics, and bioeconomic modeling. His preferred research tool has been economic lab experiments in connection with behavioral economics. He has authored or co-authored more than 100 scientific articles in which I have been an honor to be a co-author with him in several of his papers, around 8 or 9, 20 book chapters and 4 books, including Natural Resources and Environmental Justice. His teaching and research supervision activities have included agricultural and environmental economics, development economics, energy and climate change, environmental management by business, waste management, and the circular economy, and project and risk management. He has worked with PhD students on poverty, vulnerability to poverty, food security, and food safety, renewable energies, and the economics of waste, that is plastic management. He has supervised or co-supervised about 20 PhD students as well as masters and honors students, often across different disciplines. In research too, he has often worked in multidisciplinary teams. His main interest has always been interactions between biogas system dynamics and socioeconomic drivers and institutions. Last but not the least, Professor Stephen Schilizzi is my mentor, my supervisor of my PhD dissertation, and I have a lot of gratitude towards him. And I would like and request and wish him that he had some collaboration with us, just like the Vietnamese universities. We can have some online course or some future research project. So over to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much.
Also, sorry, one more thing. Can you hear?
Yes.
One more thing, Stephen, please. We have another guest from Turkey today, Dr. Mithat Direk. I have just picked him early morning, like at 3 a.m. And he is also joining us. He will be definitely sitting with Dr. Asghar Ali, and he'll be online. So over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Khalid, for your introduction. I must say that it's been a pleasure for me to have you as a PhD student. I remember the first day we had the meeting. You're on your sides now. I don't know what we had said together, but you had finished the meeting by saying that you would do your level best, and you did. Not only during your PhD, but you've been doing your level best clearly after, since you have come back to Pakistan. So I'm very impressed with what you have been doing. And yes, I've also been very happy to be able to be co-author with you. And I have to say, you did most of the work, not me. so you get all the credit. And yes, I'm quite happy to discuss with you possibilities of either co-teaching or collaborative research with your university. I'd be happy with that. Now, I suppose I should start, and I need to share my screen. So let me see here. This is what I need to do now. Let's see. Suppose this is what I have to do. Okay. There we go. Now I need to make sure that you can see what can you see my screen? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Your screen is now it is viewable. Yes, we can see.
You can see the screen now.
Yes.
Okay. Right. So thank you very much for inviting me to your seminar series, actually second time. So it's always been a pleasure to interact with people at the other end of the ocean, I would say, of the Indian Ocean. We're on one side and you're on the other side. And I hope this can lead to a little question-answer conversation at the end. So what I had agreed to talk about today was as the title says here, the prospects and challenges of a circular economy, which is a topic that is very much in vogue right now, and particularly looking at how it can be relevant to turning rural waste into valuable economic resources. And so I would like to start actually by an example that will illustrate things and allow people to basically see what we're talking about. And then in the second part, we'll look at the issues that are involved in examples like this one. Right. Okay. So the first thing I can do is if you look at some typical rural activities, and not just agricultural, but rural, which means also there are towns and villages. You can see that on columns here, I've just put some examples. You've got animal husbandry, cropping, aquaculture, fishing, forestry, building, washing, could be also transport, and all sorts of other activities as examples. And you have the different kinds of waste types in rows on the left here, plastics, different types of metals, poisonous chemicals from, say, pesticides and herbicides. You've got also organic waste, whether from plants or animals, or you have glass, cement, etc., and then gases as well. So you've got solids, liquids, and gases that could be your waste. And the example I'd like to start with is from a project that my colleagues, I'm not involved in it directly, but my colleagues here in my department are, or one or two of them are involved, in particular my colleague Marit Kracht. And she was kind enough to lend me a few slides, which I'm going to use now to show you how one can be closing the loop. It's an insect known as black soldier fly, and we'll shorten it to BSF here, as it's usually called, and how to convert livestock waste from various animals into profitable products. So the goal here is, can black soldier fly farming, can farming that insect be used as a low-cost solution to converting agricultural waste into high-quality fertilizer and feed? And how? So this is research. It's happening now. And so it's not a finished program, it's research ongoing, and I can share with you some results. All right. So there's multiple aspects to that. First of all, developing BSF farming techniques to process livestock waste. Developing BSF frass. Now, frass is a word that's being used a lot. It's the excreta from larvae, the residue, the waste from larvae, into a high quality, slow release, granulated fertilizer product. Investigate how the effects of BSF frass, what they are on soil, greenhouse gas emissions, pest emergence, and crop yield, and then investigate the adoption barriers that might exist for farmers, and what the market potential for BSF products might be. So the next few slides, I will share with you a bit of information about this project, which is quite successful. It's producing quite positive results. So you start off here on the slide, you can see on the left with animal wastes, manures, and so on. You can see different kinds. Neonates from the larvae are brought in, larvae develop on the farm or in the facilities, and there you can use the larvae themselves and to produce fertilizer, feed, biofuels, or pharmaceuticals. For feeds, you can use the outer envelope of the insect. It's high in fibers and proteins and so on. But more importantly here in this study is the use of the frass as a fertilizer. So in terms of growing BSF on manures, there has been already some years of testing. And it turns out that, yes, the BSF larvae can efficiently process livestock waste. And this is compared to growing larvae themselves on food waste. So these are different ways of actually using this recycling technology. It's a biorecycling in this case. And it has achieved more than 80% of waste reduction after 14 days. But when your waste includes inorganic components like egg layers, like shells, or the paunch waste from animals, which is not digested, and so it's still got its carbon fibers, then of course the efficiency is less. In terms of, now I've got this thing appearing, I'd like not to have that. I'm not sure how I could do this, maybe up here. All right. The frass application to as fertilizer enhances crop growth, even though it is relatively low in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium content. And you can see here, where there's no frass here on the top left, 2.5 tons per hectare, top right, and 10 tons per hectare on the bottom. And you can see the differences here in conditions that are the same under the same plot. It's basically only due to that application. It can also reduce pest species. So here you're comparing frass derived from BSF treated poultry versus raw poultry litter. And you can see down here, if you can see my cursor, you have the raw poultry litter in terms of the number of stable flies, stable from the stables. They used to keep horses, that's how it's called. And you can see that with the application, even of small quantities, relatively of BSF, you're bringing that basically to zero. So 98 to 100% reduction in those flies, which are a problem. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is another type of waste. This one is gaseous. You can see that frass derived from BSF treated poultry litter, comparing it to raw poultry litter, that if you see on the right here, the raw manure is the amounts emitted here at the top. And when you apply BSF frass, which is very low cost, remember, it's not zero, but very low, you bring it down by about 50%. And you can compare, of course, with the not having any application at all. Right, so these are the technical aspects, but also what is important is to think of the socioeconomic aspects when you want to introduce new technologies to process your waste and try to make something useful and valuable. First of all, you need to have the background, which is what are the costs of livestock waste management to producers? And they can be both financial and non-financial in terms of odor, nuisance costs, health impacts, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. So with that background, that there is cost in livestock waste, that's why you want to minimize it, reduce it. Farmers are actually interested, here in WA, in Western Australia. They are interested in black soldier fly for waste management. But there is a challenge here, a hurdle, which is we need to develop options for on-farm application, production application, because of the transport constraints. If you're going to transport from one area to another using roads, then you have issues with legislation, and the government is not very happy to have these wastes coming outside the farm, and because there's a cost aspect, but also there's a biosecurity aspect that, as you know, probably Australia is very concerned about and very careful about. Also, farmers are interested in using the BSF frass as a soil amendment as well. Now, frass is not competitive with synthetic or industrial fertilizers due to its low NPK content and also low bulk density, which means the high transport costs. So that's another reason why you wouldn't want to transport it too much. Nevertheless, farmers are interested in testing BSF-RAS as an additional organic fertilizer and soil improver, a bit like if you had humus or mulching. Also is an interesting alternative for those farmers more progressive, more environmentally oriented in using that FRAS because of its high carbon content. Right. I don't know whether you can see this little image here at the top. I put it here in the corner. Okay. BSF has also other aspects, recycling aspects, which is not part of this project, but it is able to degrade plastics. The worms actually themselves, or sorry, not the worms, but the larvae themselves degrade plastics, and they convert it into degradable bioplastics. And in the process, you can also harvest the chitin, which is the outer layer of the insect, oil and protein, and these are turned into valuable products. So here you can actually see how with this aspect as well, you can circularize, if you want, or recycle the waste. And you can see now from this example there you've got different avenues of recycling. You've just seen two of them before, and this is a third one. Okay, so we'll keep this example in mind and try to see what it actually means. I had another a slide here to show us another project here in Western Australia. This one we're not involved in, but using animal waste, including dead animals sometimes, or parts of animals, if you have an abattoir, that are turned actually, rather than being thrown away in the countryside, they're actually put in a lagoon and covered so that the fermentation, the rotting produces methane. Methane is then collected and turned into electricity that runs the farm, and therefore you avoid using fossil fuels. Okay, that's another circularizing use of animal waste. So often you would have heard that you produce biogas. In this case, you're producing electricity, but of course you can use biogas to produce electricity as well. All right, so now having seen this example, let's move on and ask ourselves, how can waste management lead to circular economy in rural settings? And so let's try to think about this, keeping that example in mind. The first thing is this a solution we want? Probably not. Probably not. Here's a picture of what they call waste pickers who earn their living, as it says here, by collecting and sorting rubbish, garbage, and selling them for recycling to recyclers. This is happening in the Philippines. But of course, we know this happens in many parts of the world. So yes, that's a kind of recycling if you want, but socially and economically, it's probably not the one we want. So let's stop and think a bit. What is involved in everything we've seen so far? Okay. Waste and the circular economy. By definition, the idea of the circular economy means absence of waste. It means we are able, the society or the economy or any community is able to take all its waste and reuse it or recycle it and make value of it, but what does that mean? In order to understand the circular economy, or how one can circularize an economy, we need to understand a bit better what is meant by waste, what kind of waste. So the implicit model that people have when they talk about this circular economy is that Mother Nature is the reference. Mother Nature recycles everything because it's evolved that way for millions of years, and you have zero waste from nature. And let's give that a name. Let's call it natural recycling or biorecycling or self-recycling if you want. Okay, now, it's not always black and white because time is a very important factor. So if you're asking what is recycled in a week, probably not much in nature. But if you ask what is recycled in 100 million years, probably everything is recycled in 100 million years. So the time dimension is important. Oh, what's happened here? I've lost my screen. Okay. Here we go.
We have your screen.
Okay. Yeah. I had lost it, but I've come back again. Yes, so the time is very important. When you ask if something is recyclable, it doesn't mean anything until you have specified the time. So as I was saying, over 1 week, not much is recyclable in nature, but over 100 million years, probably everything is recyclable. So somewhere in between, obviously, it's only certain percentages and only certain things. Okay, keeping that in mind, we realize that we humans have broken the natural cycle in many ways and in many areas. We pile up waste, sky high. So what is it about human activities that generates this non-self-recyclable waste? Okay, so we're understanding it that way. And has it always been the case? Or is it only modern times since the Industrial Revolution? So why are we producing non-self-recyclable waste? All right. So when I say nature industrial waste, I don't mean just waste that is used and rejected by industry. Farms everywhere in rural areas, they buy and use industrial products that then become industrial waste, whether it's fertilizers, whether it's pesticides, and so on, and plastics, and so on. So it's not because you're rural or because you're agriculture that you're not actually using industrial products that become industrial waste today in the 21st century. All right, so let's have a look at here why this is the case and get some perspective. Why is most of industrial waste not self-recyclable? Well, of course, it's by design. We humans transform energy and matter in a way that is not done in nature by chemical and physical process that are not the same that happen in the plant and animal life out there. Not done in nature or by nature means that nature actually doesn't know how to deal with it. It hasn't evolved millions of years to deal with a kind of materials that we reject back into it. And so it piles up and accumulates, as we saw, solids, liquids, gases. So why do we produce industrial waste? Then the next question, well, there's the materials aspect and the energy aspect. That's what M&E stands for. Well, the materials aspect has started a long time ago. It started, the first industrial waste happened, as we know, about the 5th millennium before our era. At the advent of what is called the Chalcolithic age, copper and bronze, about 4000 BC, BC in our Western calendar. As for energy, really began with the Industrial Revolution, where the idea was to produce more per unit time. In other words, a faster rate of production, with coal in particular, and then petroleum and natural gas and so on. So why do this? Well, faster rate of production, so faster production of valuable things per unit time, per year or per month or per day, means greater amounts of valued things produced per unit time. And that means greater standard of living, consumption, greater income and wealth, which societies and human beings tend to want. So the answer is that it was to improve our material well-being. We need to keep in mind, especially in those days, most people were miserable, had very little. And today, unfortunately, it is still the case in many countries where many people are still very poor. So that's the reason. Now, the other thing is that as we produce industrially these goods also come with bads, and these bads are waste. Waste not only because once you've finished using the products, you get rid of them, put them in landfills, but also in the process of producing those goods, fertilizer, plastics, you are producing waste while you're producing them. So this brings us to the first understanding of what waste is. It is a non-self-recyclable material after we finish using it. This suggests it's an ecological definition, right? And we need to know whether it's a local or global, which is something we could keep in mind. Okay, so now we are in better position to understand what is waste. And you'll see that this is very important, because otherwise we have very confused thinking that leads then to unclear strategies and decisions and policies as to what to do with waste if we don't agree on what waste is. So in the previous slide, we saw the ecological definition as non-self-recyclable, in the sense that if you throw it out there, nature will not recycle it, or at least will not recycle it for a very long time. Now, this definition also correlates with health. Health definitions for humans, but also for animals, plants, and all other living things, including bacteria and so on, because that kind of waste leads to lower fitness in the ecological sense, and then possibly death as well. So that's one very strong definition of what waste is, but it's not the only one. You also have a technological definition. For example, when you talk of water, or wasting energy. Well, in that case, that means that the usage of energy or water or whatever else is less than optimal in terms of its efficiency. It's an inefficient or suboptimal use. Okay, basically, that's another meaning of waste, which is you could be more efficient in the way you're using that material or that product or that energy. All right, there is a third definition, and that's an economic definition. And here, waste is anything that has a negative or zero value or price or utility, something that it gets in the way, with zero, or in fact, that is something you want to get rid of. And we know today that some people are willing to pay to get rid of something. That's like having a negative price. Okay, so between just a comment here as I go, value, price, well, they tend to be correlated, but not always, because in many cases prices may not exist. If you are polluting a river or if you're polluting the atmosphere, there is no price, but it has value, and therefore you're reducing value. The other thing that, in order to be clear in our minds, is that in the economic definition of waste, of being zero or negative value, is to be distinguished from what we call a byproduct, because a byproduct usually has low value compared to the main product, but it's still a positive value. A byproduct usually can be sold on a side market. So just to be clear in terms of what we're talking about. And then there's a last definition, which is simply a legal definition. And waste is anything legally designated or classified as waste. The usual rationale behind that is that it's harmful to the community's health and well-being. Okay, now, these are the four main definitions, and as you can see, they're very different. And you can see also that C and D, those two kinds of waste, show that what is waste for one individual or one community can be a resource for another, right? So a rich person wants to get rid of an armchair that it's a bit old, puts it out in the street, but a poorer person will see the armchair that does not have an armchair that has value, take it and take it home. That we do a lot of this in Australia. It's what we call curbside collection. So this is important to keep in mind. From the economic definition, what is waste for one group could be a resource for another. All right, having said this now, we can ask our question. Is a circular economy possible? Because we need to know where we're going here, and that will then determine how we manage our waste. But of course, the question depends, or the answer to the question depends on which definition of waste you use. So let's look at the consequences. If you're using the ecological and the health definition, then the circular economy means, achieving a circular economy means that all our waste can be naturally self-recyclable. If anything we put out in nature will be absorbed by nature. But of course, in order to give sense to that, you need to specify over how long. As I would say, is that over a week, a year, a century, a million years? Second definition, the technological definition. Is a circular economy possible? And then the answer is clearly no. It's not because of the second law of thermodynamics, also called the entropy law. However, there are some forms of energy that are 100% renewable without waste. If you use solar directly, nuclear fusion, but you need to keep in mind that you need to build machines or apparatus to capture the solar energy or the wind or nuclear fusion, which is not yet available. And these usually do, well, always do create waste. So the complete, circularity from the technological definition is impossible from the energy point of view, but even materially, maybe in the future, if we had the technology to recycle everything at the atomic level, decompose your waste and reassemble the atoms, and maybe that will happen in the future, but right now it's not. In terms of the economic definition, what would the circular economy mean? Well, that means eliminating all negative valued output. So that could mean basically repurposing the waste so that it's going to be valued for by some other activity, by some other people. Again, that's because I said problem is here, but it actually could be an advantage that waste for A can be a resource for B and vice versa. And then the legal definition, well, that's easy. Whoever's making the rules just decides that nothing will be labeled as waste, and your problem is solved from that definition. So these four different meanings, you need to decide which one to answer that question. All right, here's a diagram to then bring all this together. I won't spend too much time on it, but you can maybe go back to the slide and look at it. But basically, the idea is waste in its different dimensions, except for the legal one, depends as a function of interactions between the economic system here at the top, where prices are the drivers, and the ecological system down here, which absorbs, reprocesses, produces materially, and it's mediated by technology. Okay, our technology generates waste. This waste tends to be fast on per unit time. Quantities per unit time are big, whereas in ecological dynamics, it's slow. So that's one of the big issues, is that economic dynamics are fast and ecological dynamics are slow. So fast minus slow means accumulation of waste. And so this is an important thing to keep in mind. The technology then, if you're going to want to reduce, technology cannot do much regarding the green arrow. The green arrow that's what it is, the result of millions of years of evolution. What we can do is deal with this black arrow, the fast arrow, and basically reduce the amount that goes in and the types of things that go in that cannot be recycled. Okay, so having said this, let's go on now, and the second idea is, how do you reduce waste? How do you use these ideas to now become more practical? Here's an example taken from a paper that I referenced in the last slide, which takes construction industry in rural areas, building houses, stables, whatever. And you can see that one thing is putting less in, which means reducing the needs for high impact inputs to produce products. Okay, so reducing material content of the product, reducing losses of material throughout the supply chain, recycling, material substitution, and then getting more out, okay, sorry. Again, lost my slide. There we go.
Can see your slide at the moment, yes.
More intensive use, longevity, keep the products useful longer, take care of your machines, and so on. Maintenance and repair, they say, so life extension. So these are examples from the construction industry. And okay, so we've just used a number of words. People have thought about this, and you have these so-called 9R frameworks, 7R, 11R, 5R, R, for all these doing again. And you can see here that's a very used one where it goes from the linear economy and it becomes more and more, so increasing circularity all the way up to here. But in fact, when you think of it, you really have three main aspects. So that in the end, after all these things, there are really three R's that are important, which are usually called, as you can see here on the bottom, reduce, reuse, recycle. But people don't necessarily understand what they actually mean relative to, the relationship between our economic activities on the one hand and the ecology on the other hand. The first one is just reduce stuff that comes into economy from the ecosphere. Okay, so basically try to use less natural resources, as we call them. This is the reduce part. Then increase the value and the use time, or the time of use, while in the economy. Keep it in the economy for a long time, as much as we can. And the third one is reduce stuff out from the economy and back into the atmosphere. This is the usual idea of waste. We just throw it out on the side of the road or in the river or whatever. Okay, so I can refer to these as R1, R2, R3 here on the bottom. And I think these are really the important concepts. All the other ones are details about how you do it in practice. But in terms of the idea, these are the three important ones. Take less from the ecosphere by being more efficient, in particular, by being more efficient. When it is in the economic system, while it's being used, try to keep it in as long as possible and reuse it, and then try to minimize the stuff that goes back into nature, particularly by recycling as well. Okay, so here's an example where if you take the idea of plastic, which is of another very big problem everywhere, not just in rural areas, but in cities, and particularly in rivers and the oceans. You might have heard that there's a huge so-called floating island in the Pacific Ocean that's made of tons and millions of tons of plastic. Here's a diagram that pictures the current system of plastic use. You produce it. Most of it, when it's used, goes to landfill. Some of it leaks because it's broken, ends up in rivers and oceans, and so on. But what is important is a very small part is actually collected and recycled, about 14%. And that's, I think, for the USA, if I remember right. So, of course, in other countries, it could be much less than that. And you can see here that there's 4% process losses. So that, again, is a waste. And the recycled, we have two kinds of recycling. So I use this example to highlight here an important idea. The idea of, first of all, closed loop recycling, which is recycling without loss of value of the product. So you take plastics, as this example, it's plastics, and you are able to recycle them into something that has the same value or a higher value. Or it's cascaded recycling. So you recycle that into a product that has less value. A typical example of this would usually be paper, where recycled paper has, until now anyway, until recently, had less quality and therefore less value than the original paper. And you can see here that the cascade recycling for plastic, 8%, is 4 times greater than the closed loop recycling. In other words, most of the recycled plastic has lower value than the original one. That is a potential problem, but what's important to keep in mind here to see that it's not necessarily the case. If you think of the example of BASF, you can see that was not the case. From something that had low value, you basically create something that has greater value. Now, what this is telling us, what I'm using this, is that you have two types of losses here. You have loss of value while you use the product. Typical example, you use a car, and after you've used it for several years, it has less value than when you bought it new, right? But you also have value from recycling, or you can have value from recycling, certain kinds of recycling. And so how do the two compare? Where the interesting thing is when one is bigger than the other one or smaller than the other one, right? So you would probably want the value loss from recycling to be smaller than the value loss from use. That's a good thing. However, as is sometimes confounded, the fact that the loss in value, right, in dollars or whatever currency from the recycling, so the loss in value of the recycled product, the fact that it's less the loss of value from the use of the product does not mean that in the next cycle the product has higher value, okay? Because the both could be negative. Just saying that the value of loss, it's a big negative, -10 here. This one from recycling is -5, but they're still negative. So this is something that we should keep in mind. All right, so the alternative, of course, and this comes from a very well-known foundation, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which you can easily find on the internet, is if you go to a circular economy. And so basically you have the design, which is that's R1, use less of these, as they call virgin feedstocks. So that comes from directly from the environment, from the ecology. So that's reduce. Use more here, that's R2, and then recycle, that's R3. And then there could be still some waste. Okay, so what I want to tell you is this is what you'll see in the literature, and you'll see pretty much everywhere. But is that correct? Is that giving us a real picture of what we can go for? First of all, you can see that the energy flows are missing. And we know the energy flows cannot be recycled. Energy is destroyed when you use it. So that's missing already. So let's see how we can answer that. Okay, so here's another example of a cyclical system where you're using here microalgae to produce bioplastic, and how do they fit into circular economy, right? So I'm taking here another example. It's very similar to the BSF, where we saw how BSF could also consume and recycle plastics into bioplastics. Now, bioplastics means that they are degradable by the environment. In other words, they're recyclable over a certain period of time. Okay, so this is an example, another example. Sorry. And again, energy dissipation is not figured, so this happens. But what I want to say here is that this system here could be driven purely by biological processes. If that's the case, then the energy dissipation originally comes from the sunlight and photosynthesis, in which case it doesn't matter. So here again, energy dissipation is an economic concept in the end. It will always dissipate, of course, when you use it. Once you've used a liter of petrol, you can't get the energy back. But if you're using sunlight, you're still using energy, but you can see that that's not only a renewable one, but one that is not polluting per se. So it suggests there are systems that could lead us to a circular economy. So let's have a look at this a bit more closely. So what do we mean here? And before we do this, in order to get these systems, you need to invest into waste reduction. It doesn't. You saw in the BASF example that first of all, there's a lot of investment in testing what soils, how does the manure of animals, in what form must it be, how could you manage this, what temperature, and so on. The frass, also under what conditions will it be an efficient soil amendment agent, and so on. So you do need to have investments, and that could be a constraint. These always come at a cost, of course, cost of borrowing, the interest rate, and if you use your own funds, then you have the opportunity cost of capital. And the opportunity cost of capital is subject, of course, to discounting future values. And this works against delayed environmental benefits or farm benefits, for example, better soils, because it takes quite a bit of time, usually several years. And so these constraints here favors quick money projects rather than long rehabilitation projects. There also, the future is uncertain. And again, this also works against delayed environmental benefits that may not be well understood. And business decision makers tend to be risk averse, want to minimize unnecessary risks. And then you have market competition, which forces different businesses, unless you are a subsistence farmer. But if you are a market farmer, you need to make the biggest profit in order to be able to pay your rent, or you pay your expenses, and so on. And if you're in competition, of course, you need to have a bigger profit than your competitors. Otherwise, you are competed out. In addition to this, not in addition, I should say. Having said this now, we can come back to our question, is a circular economy possible? And we saw that previous slide, and try to bring all this together. Now, useful energy is not recyclable. We saw that, entropy law of physics. Recycling, broadly defined, does cost energy in materials. Recycled products R3 can also suffer what you call quality attrition. In other words, we saw, for example, for plastics, the amount that's recycled that has lower quality is 4 times greater than the one that has equal or greater quality. But then we saw with the BASF example that clever repurposing, so this is within the reusing R2, can raise again the economic value. Okay, so these are the facts that we've seen. So what do we have? 100% circularity is not possible in physical terms, the entropy law, but it is possible in value terms, depending on your technology and depending on the market. Okay, so it's not a yes or no to this question, is circular economy possible? It depends how you look at it. In fact, it's both not possible and possible in 2 different ways. And of course, this is not new. There is always a tension between the physical world and the economic world in terms of value. Okay, having said this, there is something else that we need to keep in mind. Now, this is a diagram that I have created because I was not satisfied with the diagrams, the circular diagrams that you see everywhere. This is a 3-dimensional diagram. Imagine here that you have this vertical space. This is your activity, your recycling activities coming from your economic, your red arrow going up, your economic activities. And you're trying to recycle your waste, and this is the first layer here. This waste could be the industrial recycling, chemical, physical, and by doing this, you're generating waste from recycling. So this waste will go back into nature, which is the green one, or it could go into another kind of recycling, which is the biotech recycling. So this is basically biotechnology. And what this does, it uses biological processes like nature but biotech speeds up the processes by going down into the molecular mechanisms of nature. Okay, so here you have two things going on. As you're recycling, you're having two kinds of attrition, basically, right? One is that you're not going to recycle 100%, possibly because of the economics. It's not economic to recycle everything. Secondly, so this is what, over here on the bottom left, after each cycle, less than 100% is usually recycled, often much less. You saw that it was only, what was it, 14% of plastic, but that is increasing, okay? And then there's also quality erosion or attrition, possible quality erosion, depending on the process. So what you want to do, this gives you a general model, if you want. You want to either be able to, if you can't, once you've finished keeping the product within your system, your farm, your household, whatever it is, and you want to avoid just throwing it out into nature, which is this green, circle, you either are going to want to first recycle it chemically, but that means you need to then, the waste from this has to be such that it can either be recycled by nature, which is rare, or it has to go into this biotech, which is this new industry that's appearing now as the industry for the 21st century, is biotechnology, which is in a way using biological processes, but that can do what nature does much more quickly. And in some cases, do something that nature doesn't know how to do at all. Deal with new elements, chemical elements that nature has not evolved to deal with. So this is a three-dimensional, non-stationary process over time. Non-stationary because here you have, on the top right here, technological innovations, which are going on all the time now. And these technological innovations are affecting this red arrow going up, where you're trying all the time to reduce the needs for this brown circle, and either using the blue one or the green one. You can't do the green one directly. So you end up having to go through the blue one, which is why biotech is becoming so important. Okay, so if you go back to this example of the BSF, you can apply the spiral model to the actual process and see, well, you can see that this diagram which comes with the project is incomplete. It doesn't tell the whole story. So this model here above is a tool to use to question a process like that and see in the end where are all the inputs and the outputs, and see if anything ends up in nature that nature cannot deal with. Right, and I'm going to finish now with a couple of slides. A word on government's role in all this, because everything I've said so far is in terms of the technology, the ecological processes, and the economics at the local level from farms or households. But what can the government do to help waste management orient itself towards circularity, or should I say, sort of the positive spiral? Well, securing property rights seems to be very important because, there you go, because it favors the credibility of contracts, and that favors investment. It reduces the uncertainty, so people are more able to invest in these new technologies. Provide clear legislation and definitions of what waste is and what kinds of waste can be handled in what ways, and very clear, because this clarifies responsibilities. When something goes wrong, people know who is responsible, and that creates an incentive for them to avoid mishandling that waste. What can the government do in terms of instruments? Well, an appropriate mix of these three families, right? Regulations, so it prohibits certain things like list of highly toxic chemicals should not be used. Of course, in many countries, for various reasons, highly toxic chemicals are used in agriculture and they end up in food, and then that creates food safety issues. And I've done some work in Vietnam there, and that's a very important problem there. In fact, it's become a national security problem, and I'm sure it's the case in many other countries as well. Secondly, the use of incentives, which changes the relative cost benefits of competing solutions or technologies. In other words, try to make the adoption of technologies that are able to recycle waste less uncertain and more beneficial, maybe don't tax them and things like that. And then also information and education campaigns on the impacts of certain substances. Even here in Australia, for example, when working this area, I am not sure. We have two types of bins, rubbish bins, and we're not always sure what goes into the recycling bin and what does not go into the recycling bin. So there's a lot here of information that is missing, and it's missing for me here in Australia, so I suppose it's missing for a lot of other people in many countries. Okay, now does that mean the government can do everything? No, of course. Both government and markets are imperfect. Government can partly correct for market failures. Markets can partly correct for government failures. And there's a third player here, communities. They should correct for both if they can, if they're empowered to. And my last slide is about the role of international impacts. We know as a fact, laws and regulations differ between countries, and technologies and technological levels or access to technologies differ across countries. That creates movements from stricter to less strict countries. And this is an important aspect of the waste management issue. It's not just local, it's also international. Waste has been for a long time shipped out from strict countries to less strict countries. Often that means from richer countries to poorer countries. Poor countries then can sort of buy waste in exchange for economic aid. The only thing is that this tends to worsen already pretty harsh environmental and health inequalities, not only between countries, but within the country that, so to speak, buys waste. Why? First of all, because the money that is received in terms of economic aid is not distributed throughout the community equally. And also, or even worse, beneficiaries from external aid are not the same as those who suffer from the imported waste. So typically, the waste will be dumped somewhere poor people live, or people that have very little power, maybe in rural areas, whereas the beneficiaries will be richer people in big towns. But that's something you already know. Right, so let me finish with my last slide. What points could we take from this? Some at least. One is that the economy cannot be circular as such. It has to be a dynamic spiral where technology innovation is very important. So circularity actually doesn't mean anything. We're really talking about a dynamic spiral, the diagram that I showed you. Secondly, energy is not recyclable, but it perhaps may not be an issue with solar and fusion, provided that the materials with which your solar panels or your big fusion reactors built themselves are recyclable in some way. And of course, that's not yet the case. Thirdly, waste can be defined and measured in different ways. And depending on which definition and which measurement of waste you choose, it's going to influence very strongly how you're going to manage it. So I would say keep all four definitions in mind. And the last 2 points is that industrial chemical recycling itself produces waste, and that biological recycling can achieve zero waste, potentially. Often it does not yet, but potentially it can achieve zero waste if you are able to to implement a completely biological system that is able to use sunlight, or perhaps a source of energy, another more powerful source of energy that is not polluting, to mimic self-recycling processes in a much faster way. And I'll finish there, and thank you for your attention. Here are some useful references that I think would be of value, of interest to you if you are interested in this topic. I've selected them among many. There are many out there. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Stephen Schilizzi, for a very enlightening talk about the waste management. And I took a couple of take-home messages. The one you talked about the poor nations that buy this waste in exchange of economic aids that will definitely worsen their environmental situation. And if you look around, Pakistan is contributing less than 1% towards GHG emissions, and you see what happened during last couple of months, the devastating floods, the melting glaciers, the high rising temperatures sort of thing. And we are the most affected ones from the environmental degradations. Anyways, I would like to request Professor Dr. Khalid Mushtaq to please conclude today's talk, and then we will take questions. Professor Dr. Khalid Mushtaq, please. Khalid sahab बैठे हैं, उनको सर conclude कर बोलो उनको. I think Dr. Khalid Mushtaq is disconnected. I would like to request Professor Dr. Asif Kamran, if you can hear, please. Asif, Dr. Asif, please.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor, for enlightening us with a very, important topic. So I believe some of our students in environmental economics were also listening to the topic. My name is Asif. I am professor of agriculture policy, law and governance center here. So as you rightly mentioned that this is a big issue, then what do you suggest? You must have heard about current climatic catastrophe in Pakistan.
Yes, and more than heard of it.
Yes, and yeah. And then, the countries like us, we have certain issues with the waste disposal, but largely we are recipient of the other nations' actions. So, we should improve, in our part, but we are always blamed that our per capita emissions in terms of GDP per capita are high compared to other nations. So the aggregate is low. So, when once it comes to investment priorities and then the surplus to invest, because we have not earned a lot in that way like the industrialized countries have done. So what actions do you expect that besides the awareness around all these issues we may take, and how bigger responsibility lies with the larger world in this regard? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Asif. You're talking for a country like Pakistan?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So it's a good point you're raising, because I did not, even though I said, solid, liquid and gaseous waste, I was really, as you probably realize, talking more about local waste, waste that is produced in the country and that has consequences in the country. Now you're bringing, you and Khalid as well, a different kind of waste, which is sort of global waste, which is a good way to see this. Global warming and rather the impact of climate change that is also a kind of waste. It is a waste. And just like between poor and rich communities within a country, of course, you have exactly the same issue happening internationally. And yes, as Khalid said, Pakistan belongs to those countries that is contributing little to greenhouse gas emissions, but is suffering the consequences of the global much more than others. So in terms of actions towards climate change, as you know, there are two types of actions, mitigation and adaptation. And given that Pakistan has limited resources, and particularly now that it has to deal with these floods, which is creating a lot of damage and costs, I would say that in the interest of Pakistan, adaptation is a better investment than mitigation at this stage. So that's something that you can benefit from yourself, because unlike mitigation, which is global, adaptation is local. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the management of particularly solid and liquid waste also has impacts on people's health locally. So that probably is also a worthwhile investment where that waste has important social and economic impacts. That's how I would think about your question. Of course, you know, it requires to study and have a look. I don't have a good, you know, representation, knowledge of the details of your situation, but that's how I would think about it. Given that you're very restricted in your resources, you have to direct them in terms of waste management, right? We're talking about waste management. There's other things, of course, you need to do. In terms of waste management, I would think, where is the reduction of waste of highest value to your local populations? In other words, where is that waste doing the greatest harm? Whether it's to people's health or to farm animals, it could make animals sick, it could make plants sick, it could pollute water, and so on. So that's how I would address the issue. I don't know whether answer.
No, thank you very much for a very detailed answer. Just a follow-up question. As far as the local waste is concerned, I mean, you know, that mix of policies, it is economic instruments or regulatory version of that, or the moral suasion. In neighborhoods like in Pakistan, the literacy rate is really very low, and then, you know, the awareness is low. So what do you think are the major policy instruments to introduce, you know, a sort of actionable, points for managing the local waste? So what can be successful, way, strategy? Because, you know, the regulatory regime is not that powerful to enforce it, and then it has a cost in every country. And then, you know, economic instruments also have their own, you know, complications. So what do you think, you know,
I understand,
is the better way?
My understanding at this stage will be like the third type of instrument in terms of research. And I think this, I don't know what's happening in Pakistan at this stage. And of course, this is still quite new. I'm not sure how much research is going on in the different labs around the world to make use, not only make use of, but to take the waste and add value to it, to make it valuable, right? This is the thing that's specific to the waste produced in Pakistan under the climatic conditions of Pakistan and the soil and so on, and also the technologies that's there. So from what I see now, if we're wanting to add value to the waste in rural areas of Pakistan, I think at this stage, the number one priority would be to orient or to get help or collaborations with other scientific research institutes to research specifically the kind of waste that you have in the conditions, in the ecological conditions and climate conditions that you have, because it's not because it works in Australia that it will work necessarily in Pakistan, for example, or in Canada, because the climate is different, and the biosphere is different as well. Microbes could be different and so on. So I think that would be, I'm not saying the only one, but that's what I would think of. Because if you look at that, and obviously it's going to be a biological kind of technology, therefore it's very science intensive. There's a lot of science to go into, but in terms of equipment, it doesn't necessarily have to be involve big investments in equipment unless you want to produce energy, right? Because energy required, like we saw that picture of the lagoon, right? And okay, you're going to use the biogas, but you then have this little like power plant that produces electricity. That's not available necessarily in every spot. So if it's purely biological to create feed or to create a biological fertilizer or a soil amendment, I think this can be done with low equipment investment. At least that could be the goal of the research, right?
Thank you. Yeah, just a last comment or question. I'm teaching a course on environmental economics, and the other day I was discussing economy environment typical model. We say waste disposal into the environment and the raw material, all that dynamics. So it will really help if you can share some your latest work. I will send you a separate email, and the video recording of this lecture I will give it to my students. It will be really helpful and fruitful to understand the latest knowledge and the latest
Sure, I'm also happy to send you those papers that I found most useful. I'm happy to send them to you as well.
Thank you very much for your time and wonderful lecture.
No, it's been a pleasure.
Very useful for us and our students. Thank you. Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Asif. The recording will be available, and I will put it on YouTube, and it will be available for general audience, students, or researchers around the globe. I have already, Stephen has shared the presentation of this lecture, today's lecture. I will share that presentation as well with the students and with the colleagues. Any other questions? We can take a couple of more questions. We have only 10 minutes left. Dr. Asghar Ali, if you want to add something, or Dr. Tahira. Okay, Dr. Tahira first.
Oh, we cannot hear you. You're muted. We cannot hear you.
Yeah.
Pardon me. Hi, Stephen.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. I'm Tahira Sadaf. I must introduce myself first, and I'm assistant professor here. And thank you so much for such an informative presentation, and it was knowledgeable, especially for our students, and as well as for us. So Dr. Asif was, as I have heard him, he was interested in knowing that what is the roadmap if we want to be part of this circular economies, or if we want to, let's say, reduce our externalities. So we should know that Pakistan has committed that we will reduce at least our greenhouse gases emission by 20% by the end of 2030. But we don't know how, because we lack in good governance, and we lack in steps. We don't know the steps of how would we reduce this 20% greenhouse gas emissions. So this is just an idea in my mind, that if, let's suppose, we take a start from solid waste management, and we start collecting waste of any sort from rural areas, say even from cities, and we make some points of that collection at municipal level, at industry level, even in hospitals. And if we collect that waste And we know that what's the next step to deal with that solid waste. And there should be a data set on this as well. So my point is we need good governance in this regard. This is not impossible, and this is doable. But who will monitor it, or who will implement such ideas? Ideas are there. There are studies from ADB. There are studies by many researchers. But implementation is lacking in Pakistan. So I think so we lack in good governance. We don't lack in resources. We don't lack in ideas. So if we just start with, even with just good solid waste management, we can reduce our greenhouse gas emission, which we have committed that we are going to do in 2030. So that was just a comment in response to Dr. Asif Kamran's query. And thank you so much for such a nice presentation, Stephen.
Thank you, Tara. And perhaps I can add something that I realized I didn't say. There are different types of waste, solid, liquid, and gaseous, but that in terms of input. In terms of output, they can be combined. So for example, you saw that FRAS, BSF FRAS, has solid outcomes in terms of, but it also has gaseous outcomes, because when you use it that way, what you're doing, it's not absorbing greenhouse gas, but it's substituting for something that does emit greenhouse gases. So in my view, although you are right that governance and monitoring have their role, it seems to me that the system that will really work is a system that creates value locally, as this BSF is actually doing here. So that it is actually in the interest of the farmers or the households or the little industries to actually use that process. And I would think in terms of a joint product, joint production, you have a product from your process that is for you, it's a benefit. In addition, it reduces greenhouse gases, it avoids polluting the river, and this is like a joint benefit. It's not always possible, but I think that would be the important. I would always keep that in mind. The main driver would be that it's valuable for the people that use the technology, the process. So that monitoring and governance, although they have a role, are not crucial, not essential. The system can even work if governance is not very, and that's the reality of the world. We can hope that governments will improve, but governance is what it is, and monitoring is what it is. And if you rely on it, then nothing is going to happen very well, or at least as well as you like it. So that's the way I think people are thinking here. And so at this stage, you talked about data banks and so on. One thing I see is that there should be sharing of these data so that, for example, university can have access to the results that we're having here. Collaborations then between, I'm just taking this as an example, right? Between researchers in one place and researchers in your place can work together so that you know how you can adapt the findings from here to your conditions, to your own ecological and climatic conditions. And then once these are adapted, of course, there are of more value to the people locally. So you may not actually need to, you must use it. They say, oh yes, give it to me. I'm interested in doing it, provided it's not too complicated. So there are many aspects, of course, right? But I think in terms of biotechnologies, there's an enormous input, enormous cost in research in making the technology usable by the user. But once the process is known, it has the advantage relative to the chemical and industrial technology of requiring much less investment for use. Okay, if you're going to use it on a farm, if you got your manure and then you're going to handle your manure in a certain way, put this insect in it or something, well, you can do this provided you know how to do it without big investments. And if you know, so in the end, if the benefits are greater than the cost and the costs are low, then it will pick up itself, if you see what I mean. I think that's what I would try to do first.
Yes,
And this is
exactly.
still the beginning, right? This is the beginning. In the next 5 years, I think there's going to be a lot of progress on this. 5, 10 years, yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yes, you're right. And this should be the case, and everyone should take the responsibility, not just the policymakers or implementers. It should be everyone's responsibility. I think we are running short of time. We are just left with 3 minutes of our session today. I would like to thank Professor Dr. Stephen Schilizzi for his valuable time and a wonderful lecture today. For rest of the queries, you can please direct those queries to me, or there was an email address of Professor Dr. Stephen Schilizzi mentioned in the presentation, or you can ask, I will share the email. You can directly talk to Dr. Stephen through his email. Once again, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Professor Dr. Stephen Schilizzi for today's wonderful session. As far as myself is concerned, I have learned a lot. There are a lot of messages in your presentation, and there is a lot of opportunities of joint research activities, not only the economic institutes or economic departments between of UWA or UAF, but across other departments like entomology, like agricultural engineering, environmental sciences. There are a lot of opportunities, and I hope we'll be able to reap those opportunities very soon. Once again, thank you very much, Professor Stephen, and we would like to have you again and again and again for such events.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And yes, I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody would like to ask and have any discussion or whoever wants to. But again, you know, I'm not even a specialist on this. There are other people out there that know more than me. So I could possibly direct you to people who know more than I do. I cannot hear you anymore. Okay, bye-bye.
Yes, there is some problem. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I wish you the best, and I do hope that enough help is going to come to Pakistan to help you deal with these floods.
Yes, definitely. Let's hope for the best, and let's pray for the people who are facing these problems.
Oh yes, really bad. Okay.
Yeah, the whole nation is standing firmly with those who are affected, and not only the nation but also the international community, our friends, fellows from other countries as well. Thank you once again. Bye bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Khalid. It's been a pleasure to see you again.
It's always been a pleasure to see you.